Without a doubt, one of the most influential individuals of the ancient world was the Babylonian king Hammurabi. In this video, we'll take a look at the life, laws, and legacy of this interesting and ancient historical figure. In 1901, a French archaeologist named Jacques de Morgan stumbled upon a 7-foot black basalt stele while excavating the ancient Elamite city of Susa, today in southwestern Iran. However, the massive object that he and his team found was not part of the Elamite civilization that he was digging up. In fact, it had come from Babylon, another ancient city a few hundred miles to the west. Created in 1750 BCE, the tall, black basalt stele contained 282 laws decreed by a Babylonian king known as Hammurabi. Little did De Morgan know that he had discovered one of the greatest archaeological finds of all time. So just who was Hammurabi, and why is he so important? That's what we're going to take a closer look at right now. In terms of power, Hammurabi was one of the greatest kings of both Mesopotamia and the ancient world. The time during which he lived, approximately 1810 to 1750 BCE, was an eventful one. For over a millennium before his birth, ancient Mesopotamia was already an area of high civilization and culture. Archaeological evidence seems to indicate that this area was the first region where agriculture, masonry, writing, mathematics, complex engineering, hydraulics, astronomy, and other ancient sciences were first developed. Due to their location around the Tigris and Euphrates rivers, the city-states of Mesopotamia profited greatly from trade, making many, if not most of them, extremely wealthy. As to be expected, most of these city-states were extremely competitive with each other. Among the greatest of them was Uruk, Lagash, Nippur, Ur, and Larsa. There would soon be another, Babylon. Babylon's beginnings, though, start with a group of people known as the Amorites. These people, though, were not natives to the area. Though they eventually came to rule large parts of Mesopotamia, the origins of the Amorites were actually farther to the west. They were a Semitic people originally from what is today Syria and the areas of Palestine and parts of modern Israel. Being a simple and nomadic people, the Amorites were considered to be uncivilized by the more established city dwellers of Mesopotamian society, specifically the Sumerians, Akkadians, and the Assyrians. These latter three groups of people had established their own cities and kingdoms for thousands of years in Mesopotamia. Why tribes of Amorites came to the outskirts of Mesopotamia around 2200 BCE is still not known for certain. It's probable, though, that they were escaping from years of drought in their native land, as well as searching for new pastures for their flocks. As they migrated further east, they encountered the various city-states of southern Mesopotamia. Eventually, hostilities ensued, and over the span of a few decades, the Amorites were able to capture the cities of Isin, Larsha, and Eshnunna. They also built several cities of their own. One of these, Babylon, was founded in the year 1894. The Amorites dominated Mesopotamia roughly from 2000 to 1595 BCE. During this time, several Amorite dynasties and kingdoms arose around the cities of Mari, Yamhad, Katna, Isin, and Larsa. Babylon, however, remained a relatively minor city until the reign of the Amorite king Hammurabi. In the 1800s BCE, Babylon was a relatively insignificant city-state within the Amorite Confederacy of Kings. In fact, it controlled little territory outside its own city walls. That, though, began to change when a king named Sin-Muballit took the throne. Under his reign, the power of Babylon expanded, as Sin-Muballit took over neighboring cities and fortresses. Though he was an ambitious ruler, his kingdom was still very small in comparison to that of his neighbors. The task of expanding Babylonian lands fell to his son and successor, Hammurabi. When Hammurabi ascended the throne in 1792 BCE, Babylon was surrounded by powerful adversaries. In the north was the mighty kingdom of Eshnunna, while to the south was Larsa. Far to the east, in what is today southwestern Iran, was the ancient and powerful kingdom of Elam. The first decade or so of Hammurabi's reign was relatively calm. He used this time to fortify Babylon's city walls, build temples, and construct various public works projects. However, in 1801 BCE, Elam invaded Mesopotamia and destroyed Eshnunna. Using a divide-and-rule strategy, the Elamites tried to create divisions between Larsa and Babylonia. Instead, the latter two kingdoms formed an alliance to defeat the Elamites, which technically they did, because the Elamites retreated back to their homeland. However, during the campaign against Elam, the Babylonians had actually contributed the lion's share of soldiers and had done most of the fighting. Angered by Larsa's failure to substantially contribute to the war effort, Hammurabi invaded and conquered his former ally. This started a series of conquests, and by 1763 BCE, Hammurabi had taken over nearly all of southern Mesopotamia, including the fabled cities of Uruk, Lagash, Eridu, and Ur. After consolidating his gains in the south, Hammurabi then turned his attention to the northern borders of his realm. He took over what remained of Eshnunna and then forced the wealthy city-state of Mari to submit. He also opened up hostilities with the Assyrians, eventually defeating them, though he was not able to occupy their land. In the end, though, the Babylonians were able to force the Assyrians to pay some form of tribute. By his death in 1750 BCE, Hammurabi had ruled for 42 years and had converted his relatively insignificant kingdom into Mesopotamia's mightiest empire. Babylon's glory, though, was short-lived. His son Samsu-iluna didn't seem to have the same charisma or political acumen as his father. It was during his reign that the Babylonian Empire began to unravel and eventually collapse. So now let's take a look at just why Hammurabi is so famous in the history of the world. Along with being a great leader, Hammurabi was also a good administrator. From tablets and other written records that have survived, we know that he was active in the administration of both the city of Babylon and his extended empire. He seems to have had dealt personally with everything from reorganizing the Babylonian calendar to dealing with floods and making sure that farmers had enough supplies to grow their crops. Hammurabi, though, is most remembered for his Code of Laws, the first written code that we know about. Originally based on Sumerian legal precedents and compiled around 1790 BCE, the code consisted of 282 laws that stipulated specific rules for business conduct and harsh punishments for certain crimes. The code starts with a prologue or introduction describing the divine origin of the laws and shows the Babylonian king Shamash giving them to Hammurabi. Following these are the actual laws. These were divided up into several groups with different entitlements and punishments for each. For example, laws with respect to trade were grouped together, while laws pertaining to slaves were put in another section. Others dealt with commerce and the amount of wages workers should be paid for certain tasks. While their stated goal was to promote order and justice, many, if not most of Hammurabi's laws would be considered extremely inhumane by modern standards. For example, if a man struck another who held higher status, that individual was punished with 60 lashes on the receiving end of an ox whip. If a son struck his father, his hand was to be cut off. Another law stipulated that if a house collapsed and killed the inhabitants, the builder was to blame. His punishment? Well, be put to death. The most famous of these laws, though, were that if a man took out the eye of another, then his eye was to be removed as well. This is where the common phrase, eye for an eye, tooth for a tooth, is believed to have originated from. There were some laws, though, that made sense and actually benefited the common individual. For example, if a judge incorrectly fined someone, that judge would not only have to pay 12 times the amount of the fine, but would also be removed from office. Another positive aspect of the law was that they were written in the vernacular of the day, the Akkadian language. This ensured that those who could read would be able to understand the law. Thus, ignorance of the law was not tolerated as an excuse. It's interesting that Hammurabi's Code of Law was discovered not amongst the ruins of Babylon, but in Susa, the ancient capital of the Elamites. It was probably taken during their brief occupation of Babylon in the 11th century BCE. Today, this stele rests in the Louvre Museum in Paris. Since the discovery of the original in 1901, multiple copies of the code have been found in other parts of Mesopotamia and the Middle East. Some of them are written on steles like those found at Susa. Others are on simple clay tablets. The point was not to present the law in a fancy way, but to propagate it through the realm. While most of the laws contained in Hammurabi's code would seem outdated, if not outright harsh for today's world, many of them have actually influenced our modern society. Scholars believe that Hammurabi's code influenced biblical and Mosaic law, as well as Roman law. These laws were later passed down to our own societies, especially in the West. Thanks everyone for watching. If you have any questions, please feel free to leave your comments below. I'll try to answer them as quickly as possible.